This is a beginner's watercolor tutorial, and it's with the palette that you probably already have because you would have got the code or the link to have a look at this. It shouldn't take too long. It's just to give you some ideas on how to use it and what is in it and why I chose this kind of thing. You'll see there's 8 colors, and the ones at the top are blue, red, yellow, and the ones at the bottom also blue, red, and yellow. But I'm going to explain why I included both of these colors and why I included these two as well. So these dots are basically just dried watercolor tube paint that I put on this paper, and they come from tubes like this. So these two smaller ones here, these are what we call professional grade paint, and I'll explain the difference as we go along. But what you're using is Cotman grade paint, or it's a student grade. These are great. I'll explain the difference between the two as we go. But this is just for you to have a play and to just relax and discover the kind of cool things that watercolor can do. And then as tutorials go on, I'll let you know what we do and other things that we can experiment with so that we can get some really cool effects with it. So to start with, in your little kit, you'll get this little palette. It'll have the names of the colors, which are what we call the pigment names. So the pigment is basically the colored powder that they use, and each of those colored powders has a number or an identifying mark, and that's what these are. So PB, PV, PY. And it's basically pigment, P, and B, blue. So the pigment, the blue pigment, this one particular is number 15. This one, pigment blue, this one particular is number 29. And we'll see the difference between the two. So let's get straight into it. With your kit, you will also get about 5 sheets of 100% cotton paper. Again, there's a reason why I chose this. So as we're having a chat, let's just paint along. And I'll let you know some of the things I've learnt along the way. So what you're going to need is a brush. Any old brush, it doesn't matter. Don't make it too big. Don't make it too small. A cloth or a kitchen towel, it doesn't matter. A jar of water. And something to mix your paints on. So this is a cute little thing that I've used. You can use a saucer. You can use anything. I might actually use my regular watercolor palette. It's a bit dirty, but I'll clean it up as we go. Okay. So you'll use a saucer or something like that. So the first thing I want you to do is just grab your brush, and I want you to dip it in the water, and very lightly just touch the tops of the colors. Don't worry too much about, you'll see that some has kind of come off a little bit. If that happens, just rinse your brush and just dab it on. And what this does, it activates the paint, because these are dried out. And the good thing about watercolor is it doesn't matter how many times it dries out, you can always make it come back to life again. These dot cards, you might think, oh, there's not actually that much. But depending on the size that you're painting, this could last you months. So I tend to work small in miniatures. So this amount of paint, honestly, could probably last me years. So what I'd like you to do with a very small amount of water on your brush, actually, I did not say this, get 2 glasses of water, 2 jars, one with clean water and one to wash off your brush. And this will become really dirty. And the other one is where you get your clean water from. So just with a little bit of water, just dab on a bit of the colour. And because we already put some water on it, it's already started to think about it and activate. And I want you to kind of swatch out the colour. That's what we call it. But it's basically just see what you've got. So just beside it, just very carefully, with not so much water on your brush, just have a look at what the colour is. Once you've done that one, rinse off your brush, wipe it off on your cloth, grab a small amount of more water and do the same with the one underneath. Now the camera probably won't pick it up very much, but these two blues have quite different colours and they behave differently. So you'll see that. So one's kind of like, I like to call them fairy floss. One's kind of bright and happy and cheery, and one looks more like the sky. But we'll talk about that again a bit later. Let's do the same with the other ones. So we can see this one is called Permanent Rose. It's very pinky coloured. Rinsing off my brush, grabbing some more water, and I'll do the same with this little dot. Now I don't have a lot of water on my brush, I really don't. And that's part of the trick and part of the fun of watercolour. How strong your colours are or how light your colours are will depend 100% on how much water you're using. A lot of people think that watercolour is more about the colour, but honestly, it's more about the amount of water you use. Now these ones are really hard kind of to tell the difference between the two. The yellows I find particularly. After a while you pick it up, but we'll talk about it a little bit more a bit later on. So what this does for you, if you've never used watercolour before, basically if you look at something, these two look like black dots, but they're extremely different colours, as you'll see. And that's part of getting to know what colours you have. You can see this one is such a beautiful vibrant green, and that one is quite a dark indigo navy blue almost. But when we look at them just in their dot form, they look quite similar. In the light you could probably see it a little bit, but you can see just on this very small sample we've got a lot of different colours. Like I said, we've got blue and we've got yellow, kind of like a repeat of both. So we kind of think, well, what's the point of that? These three up the top, it's what I like to call candy colours or the fairy floss colours. When we mix these together, we get some nice, bright, vibrant colours. And these ones down the bottom, when we mix these together, the colours turn out more earthy and more natural looking. And that's what they call warm colours and cool colours. So we'll go into that a bit later, tutorial down the road. But basically, mixing these together, you'll always kind of get some nice, bright, happy, vibrant kind of colours. Mixing these ones together will always throw towards the natural, the nature kind of scenes. So we'll have a look at that together and we'll paint two different scenes and you'll see the difference when you paint. So that's just playing with your colours, the colours that you have. Let's put it into practice. So I've got one of the sheets of paper. Now I've chosen this paper, and as I'm going to have a chat, I'm going to tape it up and I'm basically going to divide it into two. I've just got some like washi tape here. This particular tape, I know that it won't tear the paper. Do your own experiments. Grab some tape and if it peels the paper, don't use it. And I'm just going to tape it up. You could even just grab a pencil and draw two rectangles. That's completely fine. It's just a nice effect when you put tape down, when you peel it off and it's nice straight edges. It's very satisfying. So we're basically going to paint two mountain scenes, which is for me, one of the easiest and almost the most relaxing thing to paint. And I'm going to show you the difference between using the cool colours and the warm colours. Like I said, this is just to give you an idea of watercolours, how they work. Things like that. A mistake a lot of people make when they first start is putting way too much water on their brush or on their piece. And that's something that you don't want to do. So you don't want the watercolour to be chalky or dry that you can't drag the brush through. But you don't want it to be so wet that you lose kind of the strength or the strongness of the colour. There you go. So I didn't measure it up, just kind of eyeballed it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clean my brush and take out any paint that may have been left over in there. Okay. So brushes, any brushes will do, any brushes at all. So you can see these two. They're kind of the same size. They're very similar in size. This one here is what we call a natural hairbrush. If it comes into focus, there we go. That's a natural hairbrush. So basically the tail or the fur of an animal is used to make this. This one is a synthetic one, so I'm not sure what it's made of. It could be some kind of plastic. They're both just as good. This one is more expensive, obviously, because it's more involved. There are plenty of vegan brushes, I guess, that work just as well. I've just been used to this, so I tend to use the natural fibre brushes a lot more. But for today, we'll just use a synthetic brush. So like I said, any old brush, it doesn't matter. But you will notice after a while the difference between brushes. These ones tend to hold, the natural hair brushes tend to hold a lot more water and a lot more pigment, and you can get a lot more out of it. Having said that, the varieties that they've got now, the synthetic ones, they're really good. And they're comparable, I think. I just haven't had an opportunity to use them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some clean water, and I'm just going to very lightly go over my paper with clean water. So you can't see it, but what it's doing is it's making the paper wet. Like we said, watercolor is powder. The watercolor paint is actually powder mixed with something to keep all that powder together. But once that solution hits water, that's when it activates. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix my top two, my phthalo blue and my permanent rose together to make like a purple. So I'm going to get my mixing surface. Like I said before, it can be anything for you. It can be a saucer. So I'll grab a bit of clean water and I'm going to pick up some colour of my permanent rose. So you can see I'm going back and forth. If we look at my mixing surface, there's really not that much water. It's hardly any water. It's enough for me to get some colour off, but not a huge amount so that it's just ripping or running around the tray. Then I'll go to my phthalo blue and I just grab a tiny dab and I'm going to make a purple. So we all know that blue and yellow make purple. That was a tiny amount of blue and it completely changed the purple. I want it a bit pinker than that, so I'll go back and I'll grab some more permanent rose up the top there. So I cleaned off my brush from the blue, dipped it in the clean water again, and I'm trying to pick up some more of this colour. That's a bit better. Again, not a huge amount of water in there. But because I want this first layer to be quite light, I'm going to dip my brush into the clean water again and grab some more water. There we go. Okay. So what I've done is I've dipped my brush into clean water, picked up some more water, and this is already wet. Remember, we've wetted already. And I'm just going to go down and just put a very light wash like this. So I'm running out of colour. I'll go back and I'll do it again. And you'll get a feel for it after a while. You get a feel for how much water and how much paint you'll have on your brush. And you'll make mistakes at the beginning. Don't worry about it. It's part of the fun. Okay. What I'm doing is I'm just going over it because the paper's already wet and I've kind of got a light wet colour. And I had a little bit of water on my palette. I just dipped it in water a little bit again and I just picked up some more colour. I'm just going over until I get a really nice even layer. Like that. So this was using the blue, the phthalo blue and the permanent rose on the top of your palette. For this side, let's use the bottom two. And you'll see a very small difference, but it's a difference anyway. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the top here. I'm going to mix up. I'll just wipe this down because my mixing surface is a little bit dirty. That way I don't get any orange in my paint accidentally. So again, clean water. I'm going to try and pick up some colour. You see, with water, the colour activates actually quite easily. Now, the less water, the brighter the colour. The more water, the weaker the colour. So I'm going to pop that down there. And then I'll grab, I should rinse off my brush. It's good practice to rinse it off. Pick up some clean water. Grab a little bit of phthalo blue. Not too much, I don't want to make the same mistake as last time. There we go. Now already you can see a huge difference in the colours of purple. This one is lovely and bright and cheery, and this one is more like a maroon. It's very earthy looking. That's the difference between using the cooler colours and the warmer colours. So let's grab this. Now I want to show you the difference between pre-wetting your page and not. So this one we pre-wet, and this one we're just going in on dry. And I'll put some more water on my brush because I know this paper is just going to suck up that paint. So if you can see already the brush is dry, whereas at this stage on this side, I was already at least a third of the way down. So I'll pick up more water, I'll pick up more paint. So this is what we call working wet on dry. That was wet on wet. The paint was already wet. The paper here is dry. So you'll find what you like working with and what you prefer. Personally, I like working wet on wet. I find it has a lot more nice accidents. Okay. So we got our two light purples, and you can see it's quite a difference. Probably not in the camera. That's nice and candy coloured. That's a lot more earthy. So we're going to paint just a couple of scenes. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to go back to this one. So that's our top two, our phthalo blue and our permanent rose. And I'm going to mix up some more because this is drying out a little bit. And I want it to be a lot darker. So my brush is wet so that it's able to pick up, pick up the pigment. And I want it a lot more intense. You can see the blue is so overpowering in this. So you'll get an idea which colours are overpowering and which ones are better. So you can see I didn't rinse my brush. I just went straight in and pick up the red, and it's kind of contaminated it a little bit. That'll happen. Okay, so I'm picking up a bit more of the red. And basically these dot cards, they're for you to have a go without worrying. The paper I've chosen is 100% cotton. It's not super thick. It's actually quite thin for 100% cotton. But the reason I chose 100% cotton is because if you're working with watercolor, you can get cheap paper anywhere. But you'll get frustrated because watercolor works the best with the right surface. So I'll just put, this is like a nice thick purple. This is still a little bit wet, and you'll see what happens when I'm going to put a layer, which will be a layer of mountain about two-thirds of the way up. You can see ever so slightly, those edges are kind of furry, just a little bit furry. So I've just rinsed off my brush and I've picked up some clean water now, and I'm going to go under here and I'm going to try and blend that out a little bit. So back in, cleaning my brush, picked up some clean water, go over the top again and then blend it out. You can see it's kind of given us a really nice gradient. So this is half how I paint my mountains and half how to use this new little palette. I'm going to do the same, exactly the same with this side as I have a chat. So back to the paper, the reason I chose 100% cotton is because there's a lot of different ones that are made from wood pulp, and some cotton might have 25% or 55%. But cotton absorbs a lot better. And basically that's what watercolor is. You're giving the paint somewhere to absorb into. So if you think of a pile of sawdust compared to a cotton ball, the cotton ball is going to soak up things a lot more readily than the sawdust. And that's exactly the same reason why we chose to have cotton paper. So you can see I'm kind of going back and forth with the blue and the red until I get the purple that I want. Kind of want to make it a bit dark, but so I'm going to do kind of the same thing, about 2/3 up. Now, because this is dry, it's got a completely different effect, and it's almost made a hard line. So I just went back in and I got some clean water. I'm going to blend that out. So you can see my brush is running out of water. So I'll go and grab some more. So I don't have huge amounts of water. I'm not using massive amounts of water, but I'm using enough that I can spread the pigment around. And again, you can start to really see the difference between these two colours. So this side is using those top two, and then this side is using those bottom two blended together. And it's such a huge difference in colour. Okay, so for the last little bit, this is, again, the ultramarine. I'm going to make this quite blue for my last little layer. Okay. This should still be a little bit moist from when I just did it. So if I drop in some paint now, you can see how it's starting to kind of flow on its own. And that's because it's still a bit wet. And that's the nice thing about watercolor. You can control it to an extent. But if there's water there, it's going to do what it wants. And that's the really nice thing. You don't actually have full control. So you can see it's kind of misty and quite lovely. And the reason it's gone like that, like I mentioned before, is it's still wet. So you'll see here, there's a drop of water that's made its way onto the paper. If I leave that there, that water is going to soak in and it's going to push those particles of paint further away and you'll get what we call a bloom. I like them. A lot of people don't, but again, play and see what happens to the painting. That's the nice thing about this. So I'm going to go back in and do another layer. Now I'm not going to pick up any more pigment because I've got quite a lot here and I just want to play with it and see how it goes. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to go over and it's still wet, I can tell, because it's like feathering out. That's cool. I like that. So I'm just going to bring that down. I'm going to pick up that bit of water and use that. That was one drop and that was enough for me to feather it down like that. So you can see you can get some nice gradients, some nice flares just by doing that. So while we wait for that to dry a little bit, I'll explain about the reason I chose this as like a beginner. The top three colours are, like I said, your candy colours. That's where you get your nice brights and happy looking things. The bottom are your earthy, and we can tell from the purple just how big a difference those two sets of paints are. Now we're not going to mix the red and the orange together, the red and the yellow together, because we know it makes orange, and you do that later. Experiment with the oranges or experiment with the greens, blue and yellow, and you'll see a huge difference in the kinds of greens you can get. I'll give you an example. I did that with this very cute palette that I got. I had a little bit of blue and I had the yellow ochre. So I used these two colours. And I also use this Viridian hue. And out of those three colours, I was able to make a huge amount. Let me just find it. Yeah, I don't think I can find it. Out of just those three, I was able to make a huge amount of different greens. And that was kind of fun because I got to see just how much difference I could get out of the colours. Ah, here we go. I was looking for that. Okay. So out of those three colours, so ultramarine, the gamboge hue, this one here, and the Viridian, just playing with the different ratios of that, I got all of those colours out of just those three playing around, which is pretty cool. And exactly the same thing can happen with every other colour on this palette. Okay. So play around, mix colours and see what comes out. And they don't have to be a picture. They can just be on bits of paper like this. And you're just playing with different ratios. So you can see these were my two base colours. When I did a tiny bit of blue, that kind of goldy green came out. When I added more blue, that's what happened. When I started adding this Viridian to the yellow, then it got kind of nice and bright. More yellow and less Viridian, a brighter one. And then with extra blues in there, you got such a huge variety. So it's kind of fun to play around and experiment. The reason I chose Viridian and indigo These colours are what we call convenience colours. For example, indigo, you can mix yourself. You can see the pigments. It says PBK7, PB29 and PB15. Now that's interesting because PB29 and PB15 are these two blues here. So basically, they've gotten these two blues, mixed it together, and also put some PBK7, some black pigment in, and they've made indigo. Now, I use indigo all the time in my artwork. I can't be bothered sitting there mixing them up. So for me, it's easier to have this pre-mixed in a tube that I just use. Viridian, I just think it's a really lovely green, and it works really well with indigo, and it works really well with the halo blue. But I only realised that when I was playing around with each of these pigments and seeing how they blended with each other. So this is some other pigments that I have. I can see the yellow and some of the reds. The yellow and some of the reds, they can make a really nice orange. Some of these can make an awesome orange. Others make a very rich, fiery one, orange. Others can be kind of a light, bright orange. So just play around and see what comes out. That's basically it for beginning. Is you want to relax. Don't think you're going to paint a masterpiece, and give it a go. See what comes out. So again, this is still a little bit wet. I'm going to add another layer anyway. And down the bottom here, I'm going to add some of my indigo, because I know having a contrast of really light and really dark works really well, especially in a landscape. So again, I'm not using a huge amount of water. So I'm rinsing off my brush now, and I'll do exactly the same for this side. Ultramarine. So you can see here, for me, there's not enough pigment, there's not enough paint. So I'm going to dip my brush in water. I'm going to kind of really get in there and scrub. These paints have been hardened. Like I've let them cure, I guess, for about 6 weeks. They're as hard as a rock. So in order for the paint to work, it needs to be activated. Okay, that's better. So we've got a little bit more paint. That's much better. And as I do more tutorials, I'll explain a little bit more in depth, like about pigments and about paint and how it works. And so that's cool. Two very different color palettes, I guess. And some people are much more earthy. They like those earthy tones, and some people like the bright, happy tones. And by all means, play with cross-mixing. What does the purple look like if it's this fire engine red and this happy sea blue? Or what is the purple like when you mix the ultramarine, the sky blue, with the rose? Play. And then see what combinations come out and see which ones that you like. So for this last layer, if you're following along, I'd love to see what you've done. So I think all my socials and everything should be on the packaging of your paint. So tag me and say, I did it and this is what it looks like. And if it doesn't look exactly the same, it really doesn't matter. Just relax and have fun. Let the watercolor do what it wants. Okay. So that's that for now. We have our two little scenes, and you can see that I taped them up. And like I said before, it doesn't matter if you don't have any tape. You can just put like a square or use a pencil or do it freehand. But this is really satisfying if it works. It worked. This is probably my favourite part about painting. Now you'll see the tape is coming up with no problems at all. That's because I have done countless experiments, and this tape works. It's called Nitto tape, if you're looking for it. You can get it on eBay. It's basically, I think it's a painter's masking tape from Japan. It's a bit pricey, but if you have just normal masking tape, use that. But before you put it on your paper, just put it like the length of it on your jeans a couple of times. You'll see what happens. See, spoke too soon. That is peeling up some of the paper. So I'll go a bit slower and be less aggressive with it. Yeah, just put a couple of the lengths of it on your jeans and just take some of the tackiness off. Now, this is a very basic scene, I guess. But sometimes when I'm painting scenes like this, it can take like nearly an hour to do. It just depends on how much you let it dry, what kind of blends you want. Look at that. That is satisfying. Bit of a tear up there, but that doesn't matter. But that just shows what you can do with just two colours. So this scene is just two colours mixed together. This scene is just two colours mixed together. So on your own, paint and experiment. Do things like I did and mix them together. Write them down. Do it in a book. Show you. I have a sketchbook, and what I always do, it's not a particularly expensive book or anything, is at the start of every sketchbook. I mean, I've had my colour palette for years, but I go again and I just paint out each colour that I have and then just play with some blends, like experiment. And the sketchbook is something that I use to just throw ideas down, and they don't always work. They're actually quite terrible sometimes, and other times they just come out exactly like you thought they would. Most times they don't, and that's fine. So you can see further on, I've done a bit of an experiment here with brushes. Looks like nothing, but I made a list of all the brushes that I have. Just had a bit of paint, and I was just seeing how long the colour would last before I had to put more water on it. These kind of experiments, they're relaxing, and they help you learn about your materials. And this was just using, where did I put this? Here it is. Just using indigo. And because I love landscapes, I was just experimenting with the kind of scenes I could get just using one colour. And that was all play. And some of the things that turned out are beautiful. I love this. I really do. And you can see the cool effects that you can get from watercolour when you just play and let it go. Same with here. I just painted a page and got some really cool effects just from the watercolour, letting it do its thing. So that was the first kind of installment, I guess, of your little sample palette. Hope it was informative and useful, and thank you for buying it. The reason I did this is because when I first started watercolors, I basically went out and thought, I'm just going to buy the best that I could find at the time, which was about 15 years ago. And I researched and researched, and I bought professional watercolors right from the start. I had no experience whatsoever. And when it came, it had 2 yellows, 2 blues, 2 reds. I had no clue why. For years, I just thought, oh, that was wasteful. Until I started doing some experimenting and doing a lot of research and realized that there's this thing called warm and cool colors, and the way you use them can give you very different effects. It can either make a painting feel very earthy, or it can make it feel very fresh and poppy. That's the only way I know how to describe it. So what I'd like you to do now is do something similar to what we just did. Just use a few layers, but experiment with the colors that you have, the yellow and the reds together. Okay. See how indigo works with these different colors. What happens when you mix the Viridian with the Phthalo? And then we'll experiment together a bit later on with some other things as well. So thank you for being with me for this little tutorial. If you want to purchase this and you'll just come across it on YouTube, the link for it will be down below in the description. All you need basically is the little kit, and in it will come, up to you, 5 or 10 pages of this 100% watercolor paper. And this is quite thin, so you don't need much water at all. Normally, I work on paper that's much thicker than this, at least 3 times as thick. Okay. When I'm doing my little experiments, let's see if I've got an example here. Yeah, this is the kind of paper that I'm normally working with. Probably difficult to see, but this is a lot heavier and a lot weightier than this one. But when you're just starting out, the best tools are the ones you've got. So a saucer, that can be your mixing plate. You got a couple of colors to experiment. You got some quality 100% cotton paper, water, and a brush, and just some time. So I will do another tutorial quite soon, and we'll have a look at painting a scene or painting things with these colors again. And then after that, we'll have a look at things like how to set your picture so that it looks nice. So composition, what is composition? Why do we need it? Things like that. So thank you again very much, and I hope you found this very helpful. And let me know in the comments what you think, or if you did buy this little kit from one of the makers in Tasmania here. And let me know, where did you get it? I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear where it went. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.